Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Arslanbek Makhmudov. It really has been quite fun in recent years, the past 5 years or so, that I've been covering and following his journey through the heavyweight division, watching him fight, because a guy that would come forward and just swing for the fences really tried to use his brute strength and physicality, intimidated fighters, and really just tried to take their heads off. But as we've seen the past couple of fights where he's fought at a better level, that skills pay the bills, and he's come up short. He was brutalized to the body by gatekeeper on the big stage on a Saudi card, and now he's lost to Guido Vianello, who through footwork, finesse, and pinpoint accuracy absolutely peppered him to the head, and ironically used the right hand and right uppercut, Makhmudov's favourite weapons, against him. So the question now, Arslanbek Makhmudov, a record of 19-2, and this was another beatdown that he's taken. He was again exposed for his lack of technical prowess by a fighter who is on the improve in Guido Vianello. So the question now is, what next for Arslanbek Makhmudov? Big Mac, what do you do with him now? Because I think there is a case to say that his journey, his aspirations for a title and to get to world level and mix it with the best, for now at least, and probably for good, that has been put to bed. Arslanbek Makhmudov has got to accept, in my view, a new role in the heavyweight division if he wants to continue. Sure, he may continue to fight on some good cards and sort of support roles. We've seen just on that card where he fought Vianello, he was supporting Christian Mbili. That could potentially be his lot. So either they're going to have to match him more modestly, and he's going to have to face guys that are in that sort of top 30 to top 70 range, who he was fighting pretty much on the come up, or they're going to have to go, okay, well, you're now a gatekeeper of sorts, and sure, you might win one or two, but you're going to be a guy that's going to be match tough and against guys that are potentially looking to use you as a stepping stone. But at 35 years old, I think we have to say the aspirations of getting too much higher in terms of big wins to get him to a position for a title, long gone, dead and buried at this point. He's been fun over the past 5 years, but at the end of the day, the intimidation, the physicality, the brute strength hasn't been enough for him to get past the guys when it really mattered. And Makhmudov is going to have to make some hard decisions. And if he's still in the top rank stable because he's co-promoted by them, along with Eye of the Tiger management, Top Rank may be looking at him as a guy, for some of their fighters, that they stay busy, they stay ready, they use him in some of his notoriety, because the last year or two, he had started to make a bit of a name for himself, get more in the broader consciousness of boxing fans. And let's face it, some of the promoters, and when he was on DAZN, were trying to hype him up as a boogeyman. I think for those who've been following him for some considerable time, we knew at some point it was all going to fall apart. Maybe it wasn't expected to be so bad against Kabiel, but at some point he was going to come a cropper and lose. And it would be because he had shortfalls which he wasn't able to, basically paper over the cracks with other attributes that he has, like the big right hand. And let's face it, after that loss to Kabiel, the intimidatory factor that he had was gone. And you saw Guido Vianello was not shrinking against Makhmudov. In fact, he was going for him. He was looking to pot shot him, punch with him, and basically absolutely try to take his head off. And we hadn't seen that earlier in Makhmudov's career. And I think a good example is Johnny Rice, a very talented fighter who actually beat Guido Vianello, stopped him with a right hand that caused a cut. Rice, probably because of the intimidatory factor that came with Makhmudov and him pressing forward and tracking forward and trying to absolutely take your head off, he fought a back foot game. If Rice had fought the Makhmudov that we saw against Vianello, I think he would have taken a different strategy, been more toe-to-toe with him. But I guess the Makhmudov of 2 or 3 years ago versus what we've got now, I actually think they are totally different animals. I think Makhmudov against Kabiel took something from him. Against Vianello, we saw a different fighter, more cautious, and he didn't seem to have as much confidence, and he didn't exude that same sort of aura and that, real maniacal sort of just, I'm going to really brutalize you. Sure, he might have been saying that in the build-up, but you have to ask the question, did he really believe it? Because I think there is self-doubt there. And we've seen that Makhmudov's chin is maybe not as good as he potentially thought it was. And I think for a guy that's taken a lot of punishment through the amateurs as well, remember, he's a guy that has been fighting his whole life. Not a guy that picked up the sport at 22 years old. Started, before the age of 10 years old. So some will say, well, why isn't he any better? Why isn't the technical aspects of his game better? Why isn't he more fundamental? Well, that's a question. But I do think they tried to make some tweaks for this Vianello fight, but ultimately reverts to type, and he kind of is what he is. And I've been saying that for some point. You know what you're going to get with Makhmudov. He's entertaining to watch, and that's why it's been fun to watch him in the past 5 years or so as he's really started to make a move up in the heavyweight division. But obviously, we've seen skills pay the bills, and he's come up short. So if he's still with Top Rank, is there potential that if someone like an FA or Jugbat needed to stay busy, is that a fight that they would make? Jared Anderson's just lost to Martin Bakole. Would they look to use Makhmudov as a guy to effectively give him some confidence that it's not just a complete gimme, but Anderson, if he is going anywhere in the heavyweight division, beats Makhmudov and he uses his skill to do so. Also, in the comment section of the post-fight video, Jeremiah Milton, who has fought on some top-ranked cards in recent years, he had said that, that was a guy that he was calling for. That's a sort of level of fight that I think is going to be quite competitive, and Makhmudov and Milton would be a good fight. But there are potential other names even in Top Rank. What about Richard Torres in a fight or two? And that's when you have to consider on the Makhmudov side, do you want to be used like that? Or are they going to try at Eye of the Tiger management, build him up for a few comeback type fights, for 2 or 3 fights to build a bit of confidence and, try to get his name back out there as someone who could potentially do something or have a big payday on a Saudi card. But I think because Makhmudov is 35 years old and we know basically what he is, and he's still going to basically be what he is for the rest of his career, I think they should just match him in appropriate level fights. And if the biggest paydays are for stepping stone type of fights where guys would be favoured to beat him, well, maybe that's his lot now. Some people may say that he should retire. I think maybe that's a little bit premature because I think not everyone can go to the top. Guys like Makhmudov have their value, they have a level, we know what they are, and at a certain point, if he's acting as a gatekeeper, he will keep the gate closed on certain occasions. He'll catch guys, that potentially he wasn't expected to beat. But he will potentially just drift around that top 25 to 40 level and be a guy that is solid for a few years at that level, playing a role as a division gatekeeper. I could see that happening in the next few years, if that's a role he wants to choose to accept. I don't see the value in putting him in with a couple of low-level guys that are sort of top 100 or 200 in the world. He absolutely obliterates them, and then they throw him in against someone who's a top 15, who we know will beat him. So we'll have to see what happens. And maybe the Saudis, given, he does come and try to, take the head off of his opponent, will go, perhaps there's 1 or 2 last opportunities. You could throw him in with some potential guys. What about him with a Michael Hunter, him with an Otto Wallin, him with a Jermaine Franklin? There are some names that could be some good fights, but ultimately he might be expected to lose, especially if the guys have good fundamentals, can stay out of the way, and are good counterpunchers. Vianello used his footwork, used counterpunching, and sometimes, he did risk things maybe a little bit more than he should have later in that fight, especially when Makhmudov was just basically swinging for the fences. But he got the job done in the end. Closed up that eye to such an extent, and you saw from the thumbnail, pretty brutal stuff. So there's decisions to be made for Makhmudov, and he hasn't made any statements from what I've seen publicly that he is going to retire. So I think we can take that off the table for now, but then again, maybe he needs a bit more time to reflect on his career. I don't think he's made huge money at this point, and boxing is his profession. He will probably, as a lot of boxers do, think that this is just a blip, he can come back. But I think there is a role he can play at a certain level as a gatekeeper. On social media, he's basically said, after multiple head strikes, my left eye completely closed, so I didn't see all the attacks from the right, and the doctor stopped the fight in the 8th. Did everything what I can. I think ahead of that 3rd round, when the eye was peppered and closed up, he was still getting pieced up by Guido Vianello. So it was pretty much start to finish domination by Vianello. And obviously at the end of that 1st round, he did wobble Makhmudov. There was another point where Makhmudov touched down with his gloves on the canvas, wasn't called as a knockdown. So he's a guy who can do certain things, and different promoters and matchmakers will look at him, and potentially they can take some value from using his name against an up-and-coming fighter. There's other guys in the UK scene that potentially might want to be matched with Makhmudov. Are they willing to sort of send him over to the UK, have him travel, be the B-side? Or will he just sort of continue to ply his trade in the United States? I think there's different options, but ultimately you're going to have to accept lower money and a different role of what they were thinking just a few fights ago. He was on the rise, but ultimately his level's been found and there's decisions to be made. What do you think should be next for Arslanbek Makhmudov? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.